So let's get started. Those of you who are here, I can't know whether or not you have an upcoming interview at Colorado. Probably many of you do, and there's probably some of you that do not. I do know that interviews will begin, or even they may have even started, but I know that there will be an upcoming date. Is it the 24th or 25th of this month? I believe it's 25th of April, which will be, I believe, trying to work the magic here a little bit. Okay, so I'm Kevin. It's great to meet all of you. And if you do see that something's going off and the audio is off or the video is off, please let me know. Thank you guys. By the way, I saw on Facebook you guys are saying the sound is good. My hope is that this will be a good connection. So again, we tried to do this a few weeks ago, and the audio was okay, but the video kept having issues, and now it looks like the video might be having more issues. So we're going to see how this works. It's always around this time that it happens. I may have to move the time so that this works. Oh, see, it's having trouble. Come on, come back. Getting bogged down by something. All right. I'm sorry about these little hiccups that you're seeing. What I think is happening is that this happened last time we had it at this time of day. It's 4 o'clock Pacific time right now. And my guess is people are, for whatever reason, getting on the internet, even in our neighborhood. And we usually have a really strong, now we have upgraded our internet. We usually have a very strong internet connection, but we're still getting these downwards valleys, if you will, opposite of spikes, where they're just completely throwing us off. It pauses for a few minutes. I'm basically at the whim of the fact that everybody's staying home right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that everybody's working from home, everybody's streaming Netflix and all that kind of stuff. And I think people are at that point now. Maybe if they're just they might be working from home and they just kind of stopped, ended their day, and now they're deciding to start some entertainment or something like that streaming. So I do want to apologize ahead of time that we might have some hiccups here with this stream, but we'll do our best. Okay, so getting into it, my name's Kevin Marshall. Been with IDC now for 7 or 8 years. If you don't know me, had a lot of experience in my past life in the university system, interviewing in terms of admissions and faculty, staff, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm very familiar with admissions, interviewing and admissions, acceptances, and the selection process and everything like that, including documents, application documents, etc. So if you've been to any of my previous workshops, you know who I am. I don't want to waste too much time going into that, but if you're not sure who I am, welcome. I'm happy to have you. I'm really honored to have you guys join me in this. And let's talk interviews, which is something that I do quite a lot of. Now let's get into the meat of it. Why do they ask ethical questions at a dental school interview? Pretty obvious to me. Couple ideas. First, there's a desire to see if you can adhere to the Hippocratic Oath. This is a picture of the Hippocratic Oath, by the way, from, I believe this is ancient Greece or something. And it is one of these traditions that it's kind of cool in medicine, right? That goes way back to the ancient times, and it's kind of continued through the millennia. Now, there's a Hippocratic Oath that I think there's a part of it that says, "Don't do no harm. I will do no harm." I don't believe that line is actually in the Hippocratic Oath. I just learned that a little while back. But it's the idea that you're going to be doing the best you can for your patient, and that you have the best intentions for your patient in mind. This is important because throughout all of history, there's always been this sort of sort of ethical dilemma, which is that the person you're paying money to is also supposed to help you. And so there's an incentive for a doctor or a dentist or a medical provider to treat you, right? There's a treatment incentive, and that's goes back all the way to the ancient days of the sun that we've always had to curb for. Now, some countries have done a good job with this in terms of being able to separate payment from treatment reward and stuff like that. But in the U.S., especially with dentistry, it's very linked. The more treatments a dentist does, the more money they're going to make. Now, how do the dental schools approach this? How do they curb this? And why is it important to them? Well, the main thing, it's the reason that it's so important for a dental school and for the ADA, the American Dental Association and stuff, to prevent this as much as possible, to prevent over-treatment really, is it's the reputation of the field. If dentistry develops the reputation that they are out to get you, don't trust dentists, they're not your friends, they're trying to take your money, guess what? People stop showing up to dentists as often. Maybe they go if they're in real pain, but they're not going to go unless they're in absolute agony, right? We don't want that. We want prevention. We want people to feel that they can comfortably go to their dentist and be told the truth. And so it's really important. This problem takes place all the way back to the dental school about who do they let in. And if they can tell in your interview that maybe there's something off about your ethics, maybe there's something a little funny about the way you think about things that's not so good and not patient-oriented, maybe they should say no to you, because number one, it's going to affect even the dental industry as a whole, as we just mentioned, but it's also going to affect the prestige and reputation of that dental school. Oh, that dental school, Colorado, they just keep, hypothetically, they just keep graduating dentists that don't have any ethics. If that were the case, and that's not the case, but if that were the case, Colorado would be upset. They would start losing applicants, and they would develop a bad reputation. People would stop taking them less seriously in the world. So they have a huge incentive to make sure that the Hippocratic Oath is followed, that you are a type of person that stands up for what you believe in, and they understand your values. They understand what you think is right and wrong. And by the way, I just want to say there's going to be some background noise from my family. I really apologize, but I normally like to do these at an office location outside of the home. But unfortunately, I'm trapped here, so I do appreciate your understanding with some of the background noise of my toddler. Okay, so this is what this is all about, getting an idea for your values. Now let's look at what is your job as a dental student candidate. The main thing would be to demonstrate to them that to express to them that in no uncertain circumstances, your full intention is to live up to the highest ethical and moral principles, both as a student, professional, and as a doctor. So this is really the big challenge for you guys, is you really need to convince them with all of your responses that you take this very seriously, and that maybe you don't know all the right answers. Maybe you don't know exactly what to do in every particular ethical situation or thing scenario that they throw at you, but at least your heart's in the right place and your mind's in the right place. You understand the trade-offs, what could the damages that could be caused to a patient, the damages that could be caused to reputation and all that kind of stuff. You understand what's going on. And also, the other part of your job is to be able to provide specific examples of ethical scenarios that you yourself have encountered. Because it's one thing to say, hypothetically, I would do this or I would do that. But in interviews, they learn more from you based on what you've already done. And so that's one of the important types of questions that you're going to get is, okay, backing up here, psychology would suggest that a person's behavior going forward it's sort of based on what they've done in the past. It's very likely that if you've been robbing banks your whole life, there's a good argument that you'll continue to rob banks, right? And that's the theory here that they're betting on when they ask you, what have you done? Tell us about some ethical scenarios you've been through. Because again, it's easy to say I'll do these great things, and then in a real situation, have you acted that way? So that's sort of the basics of this. What are they asking for? What are they looking for? Now let's get into, and this is what I would say, these are the nuts and bolts tips. I like to say there is a right answer to ethical questions. There's not too many other situations in an interview where there's kind of like a right answer and a wrong answer. Now, that's not true with all ethical questions. I'm not going to say that's always true, but there are certain ones where there's especially a right and a wrong. And you will be dinged, if not even sometimes disqualified, for putting out that wrong, completely opposite of what you should be doing kind of answer. So that says, I don't want to scare you, but I do want to make you aware that you want to be, in terms of ethical questions, there's less leeway to be outside of the range of what is accepted for an answer. The other thing I want to say is, in general, it's good to avoid, maybe I would do that, or I don't know what I would do, I'm not sure, and these kind of, as you're responding, using those kind of phrases like maybe, don't know, not sure, doesn't exactly give them a sense of confidence that you have strong ethical values. It might come across instead like, yeah, I could go either way, I'm not sure. So being decisive and strong is really important when it comes to ethical questions. And it's not just that, they think that you are going to go out and intentionally harm patients or steal money or something, or try to overtreat. It's also, they want to test, what if you saw that kind of stuff going on? And so you might be the person who says, I would never do that. But when they ask you, would you stop someone else from doing that, like a colleague? And your answer is like, well, maybe. I don't know. That's not very reassuring too, because again, the only way the dental field stays and maintains a level of positive reputation and being known for good people that don't harm patients is by dentists peer pressuring each other, really. Like if you see a colleague doing something that shouldn't be doing and no one's out to police that, it's just going to keep happening. And so it's important that there's a certain level of rejection and I hate to say it, just like kind of judgment from dentist to dentist if they see this kind of unethical behavior going on, or at least condemnation, I should say, so that behavior at least has a chance to change and improve in a particular dentist. So those are some of the things, the bigger picture things to think about. The other thing that you need to do, I'm going to say is like a nuts and bolts tip, is have multiple ethical scenarios available at your mental fingertips, ready to discuss. And so I said that before, but again, you need to have stories and situations from your past in your head. You don't want to be thinking of these at the interview, especially when you're on, it's the heat of the moment and they're asking you, give me an example, give me a time where, and you're just like, and you go blank. And that will really tank your interview. Not only will it tank that question, but in my experience, it makes you feel, as the interviewee, you start to worry about what you've just allowed to happen. You went blank, you feel dumb, you look stupid, you feel stupid, and then you start to perform that way. I mean, suddenly your performance kind of takes a nosedive too on the rest of the questions that maybe you did prepare for. So it's, and I know this from experience. I remember, we never forget our bad interviews, right? I'll never forget the interview I went to in which I was blank for an answer like this. And my Lord, I mean, I could not get my focus back on track the rest of the interview. And of course I didn't. That interview did not go well. I did not get accepted. So that's really important to have this stuff available ahead of time. Now this is a little diagram that I really like. It's to give you an understanding of what actually counts as an ethical scenario. Because again, you're going to be asked by Colorado for pretty likely to happen that you're going to be asked how, give me an example, give me an ethical scenario that you've encountered. And if you don't actually know what an ethical scenario is, you're going to give one that's not really an ethical scenario. An ethical scenario, just to put it plainly, is it should be an example. It should be pulling you, the subject of, you're the person in question here, in two different directions at the same time. And what do I mean by that? Like, you should feel a dilemma. That's that key word here. There should be a dilemma. I don't know what to do. Here's a situation that's come up. and I'm not sure what decision to make. I have a dilemma. And also, if I go with choice A, there's a cost. There's a consequence to that. And if I go with option B, there's also a consequence to that. So I don't know what to do. So this is a great, this is what I love this this diagram here, because it's that classic dilemma. Do I save, here's the guy or whatever, he's got his little track changer. He can choose which track the train's going to go on. Does he or she choose to let it run over one person or five people, right? And this is not a fun choice. Now, whether you have a logical answer for it, which I'm sure we could all say, well, it's better to run over the person, the track with one person. Even if that's the right answer, it doesn't make it much better. You don't want to run over anyone. You want to figure out a way to stop the train, right? So, but that's not always an option. And ethical situations are often like this. If you do one way, you're going to hurt someone. If you go with option A, you're going to hurt someone. If you go with option B, you're going to hurt someone. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that someone is somebody else. Usually it could be a patient. It could be your dental practice, your supervisor or manager, your colleagues. So someone's going to get kind of hurt or it's not going to be good for them. And that's how you know you have a good ethical question. If you don't have a good ethical scenario, if your scenario doesn't showcase this dilemma, this tension between two bad choices, then you really maybe just have a policy. And what I mean by that is, here's the classic bad example that people like to give me. Ethical scenario, yeah, I was working at a practice and a patient came in and she said she asked for a discount, and I said, yeah, okay. I said, no, I can't give you a discount for my practice. My practice won't let me give discounts, but I'll just pay for you out of my own pocket. And that was the ethical dilemma. Now, that is sort of a policy issue, right? The policy is that we don't give discounts or free treatment. Maybe it's even free treatment. We don't give free treatments to patients even if they need it. Maybe that's my office policy, right? And so where's the dilemma in that? Well, it's really not a dilemma. You either follow that or you don't. Now, let's say that you decide to take your own salary and pay for their treatment. Well, you've made a choice. Is it an unethical choice? Who's hurt by that? Well, your manager or the office who owns the practice owner, they're not really hurt by that. You didn't steal money from them. You didn't take money out of their overhead or anything like that. You are paying them. Someone's going to give them their money. They're going to get their money. The patient's not hurt by that. They're fine. They're getting free treatment. Great. The only person that's going to be hurt by it is you. And while that you could say that's somewhat unethical, but really is it? Because it's just kind of a bad choice or a good choice, whatever you feel is right for you. But because you're the one making the choice, you have the power to say yes or no. It's not really unethical if you say yes to that patient and pay out of your pocket. You made your own choice. You had the power to do so. No one forced you to do so, and you made a choice that was right for you, and that you felt bad for that patient. So there's really no one hurt by this situation, you making that choice. And that's why it's not a really good ethical scenario. Now, you could people do it anyway, and maybe there's a way you could tweak it so it feels more like an ethical issue, but it's not a really good one. That's just sort of an example I want to showcase. Just because your place has a policy about yes or no with stuff and you follow it or not, it doesn't mean that it's an ethical scenario. If somebody asks you to do a treatment that was not in their best interest and you say no, well, there's nothing unethical about that. You just told them you're not going to do something that's going to hurt them. What's unethical? Just because they wanted something unethical or they wanted something stupid, that's not unethical in itself. Now, what if we can change the scenario? Let's say they asked for a treatment that makes, they asked for a treatment and that treatment happens to bring in another couple of grand, a couple $1,000 by just doing that versus the treatment that they really need, which is only a few $100s. Well, now we're talking more unethical. Like, they asked for this, you said yes, even though they don't need it. Now they're kind of being hurt. And that's where an ethical situation would be. All right, so let's move on. I don't want to take forever, but that's a really fundamental and important thing to explain is what counts as an actual ethical situation. The other thing I want to quickly go over is these are sort of the textbook ethical components that we have to think about. Most of you have learned these in dental school, but maybe you've forgotten. General medical ethics, there's autonomy, making sure the patient has autonomy. There's non-maleficence. I never say that exactly correct, but just the sense of wanting to do good and not harm. There's justice, wanting to make sure that every patient is getting a just and fair experience from you, and beneficence. And I think I have to look that up. I'm sorry, I don't remember all these, but in general, these are all about just making sure that you are treating the patient with respect, and you're giving them autonomy, and you're making sure that you have their best interest in mind. And just kind of I wouldn't say that they're going to quiz you on these. I've never heard of anyone necessarily getting quizzed on these, but there's a few questions I have heard of people being, what do you think of, what's your thought on autonomy or something with patients? So something kind of basic like that. So maybe you're not going to get a quiz on all of them, but you might get a question on one of them or two of them sometimes in some interviews. Doesn't mean Colorado does that very often. I rarely have ever heard of that. Yeah, and some of them are kind of, I feel like there's a crossover with those, like non-maleficence and beneficence are kind of similar in their in what they do. The justice one is kind of interesting, especially right now, by the way. It's sort of that we're dealing with a COVID-19 issue of like scarcity and distribution. So, a lot of the times we're hearing about two patients arrive and they both need a ventilator, and who gets it. And so a lot of difficult choice for how do we deal with the justice of that? Most of the stories are about how the doctor has to choose the younger person or the healthier person. So stuff to think about. Interesting questions. All right. Ethical question number 1. Now we're going to get into some examples, and I just want to kind of throw these out there. I'm not giving you necessarily the perfect answer, but I'm going to give you some ideas to think about in terms of better answers, solid answers, all that kind of stuff. And this is one that it does come from Colorado. Is it okay to lie? And let me just check. Okay. Some people are saying it's still not streaming, but I think I see it streaming all right. So let me just put a note in the chat box. Okay, streaming issues. All right, so I'm just telling people, if you're having streaming issues, you can try the video directly at Facebook at our page, International Dentist Central. Okay, so let's get into this again. Is it okay to lie? A question that comes from Colorado. Now, you might be tempted to want to say, sometimes it's okay if it's a white lie and kind of get into this. I try to just avoid getting too philosophical about this, and I really just try to go to the clear, simple, straightforward, robust answer of no, it's not okay to lie. It's never okay to lie. Is there a possibility that they could be skeptical of your response and say, come on, you never lied? Yeah, there might be, and we'll talk about what you could say as a response, as a follow-up question to that. But in general, it's something to the effect of, it's not okay to lie. Of course, people do lie. Sometimes they do it to gain something in the short term, but I think long term there's a lot of consequences to that. And under pressure, sometimes people will also lie. You might have practices that are really struggling financially, and they might do some things or make tell patients things that are not necessarily true in order to overtreat or something like that. So I know that kind of stuff does happen. But the way I think about it is, if that's going on in the practice, there's better ways of handling that that are good for the patient and good for me and good for the business in the long run. And maybe it's about adjusting things from a business point of view. Maybe it's about getting business consultants in there to help out. But it shouldn't be coming to kind of a fraud or lies as the solution. It never should be that way. If you make a mistake, even as a dentist, I know that can happen. If people make mistakes as a practitioner, which does happen, instead of lying, which people, unfortunately, there are dentists who do that. It's important for me. I just feel like most patients, if they understand where you're coming from, that it was an honest mistake, they'll forgive that. But what people really have trouble with is forgiving liars and a lie. And so I just feel strongly about the notion that it's just not okay to lie in a professional setting, or even in a personal setting, but especially especially a medical setting. Lying is just not a good idea. Now, again, you might get a pushback from them that says something like, "Oh, come on, don't we all lie? Haven't you ever lied before?" And if that's the case, you get that question, I would just try to deflect it a little bit and say, I know when I was younger, I probably told some white lies, but for me, what I have found is, as I get older, as I mature, as I grow older, life becomes simpler when I'm upfront, honest. Things just work out better. So I just strive every day to be as honest and transparent as I can. That doesn't mean I'm going to say whatever's on my mind. Sometimes that can be hurtful. If I don't like what someone's wearing, or I don't like the color they're wearing, it doesn't mean I'm going to blurt that out all the time. But that's not lying to withhold stuff. That's just my opinion anyway. What I'm talking about more is when something's at stake, a patient needs to know information, a colleague needs to know information, someone who's a dental assistant needs to know information. Being as transparent and honest and open about that as possible, that's the best way for me. So that's my suggested response, something in that vicinity, because as tempting as it is to say, well, we all lie a little bit, that's just opening a can of worms, and I don't want you guys to go down that road. So you're welcome to, if you have any different thoughts on that, feel free to put that in the comments, or if you have any questions about that, feel free to put those in the comments. But again, that's just the way I would approach that kind of question. Let's get into the next one. Now, in line of that, in that kind of same scenario, you have another scenario. Let's say you did cause a problem. You caused a complication during a restorative procedure. What do you tell the patient? Now, this is sort of going a little further and asking a specific scenario. What would you do in a situation like this? I think it's pretty simple, right? We're going to get a little harder with our questions as we go along, but to me, this is pretty simple. It's just about honesty, and that's what they want to hear, right? And this is not really something that, they might give you a little more complicated of a question. Maybe they'll tell you exactly what you did wrong, exactly what the problem was, and it's very embarrassing, and you're going to regret it. And maybe even in real life, if it happened, you'd be like, oh gosh, do I have to tell them this? But yes, you do. Your goal with this one is just to say, again, it's really important that we're honest and open as practitioners, that patients feel they can trust us and trust that we're going to let them know what's going on with their health. And if I were to cause a complication during a restorative procedure that I thought might lead to a poor outcome because of something I did, not related to, what was there to begin with, but something that I did was a mistake, maybe I removed too much material from a tooth or something like that, then I want to address that with the patient. I want to let them know what's likely to happen, and give them an outlook that they can feel like, okay, this is what to look for. Because maybe down the road, if they are able to kind of know that what the situation is, maybe they'll be able to get better intervention, treatment to resolve it before it gets worse down the road. Or maybe, we just have to do it again. It depends on how bad the situation is, of course. But, if I already have to do that again, let's say if I were to have to redo the treatment because I made that mistake, well, it may cost money, it may put us out a little bit, and I get that there's a financial penalty to that, but it's going to cause, I think, so much trust to be built by that patient that they're going to feel like we're doing everything we can to let them know of to make it right, and also to apologize if they want to come back to us, So that's just something to think about, and that's good business practice in general. So you just want to kind of go with that. Now we're going to talk. Okay, let's get to the third one. This is one I just want to give you a little insight into. You will get this question in one form or another, which is describe an ethical situation you were involved in and how you handled it. I gave you an example of a bad one just a few minutes ago of somebody, which I think is a bad one, of somebody talking about how a patient asked for a discount or free treatment, and the doctor says yes. What is a better one? What are better ones? Well, here's what I'd say are some of the guidelines to think about. You want, again, that diagram I just showed you of the train. It's going to run over one person or 5 people. You want to have one that shows that happening. There's a cost for choice A, there's a cost for choice B, decision A, decision B. But you don't want to be the one who caused the situation to arise, right? So while it's true that an ethical scenario I dealt with, let's say, for example, an ethical scenario I dealt with is one time I tried to overtreat somebody who I just needed the money, and it was they would have never known, and I just said, oh, let's do a root canal, even though all they needed was a simple restoration. That counts as an ethical situation. You had, and I wasn't, maybe it was a decision to it. Like, I wasn't sure if I should do it or not. I felt a little bad, but I did it anyway. Yes, that technically is an ethical situation. It's a problem. It's something that they'd like to hear about, and it's going to get you nowhere. It's going to obviously hurt you. So, and that's an extreme example, but there are other times where I've heard people use similar things, and they end up becoming they become the person who created the problem. You don't want to be the person who created the problem in your story ever. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to be the person that makes the right decision, and you also want to be the person that's sort of like a victim of an unfortunate scenario. So it's, in general, it's always somebody else that's doing this, that's suggesting or trying to encourage you or influence you to do the wrong thing. It's always like that. That's the classic good ethical scenario response. So, again, if we think about one that I remember very well, actually, this is from a dental student I knew who went out into, I love, he was such a great guy, and he had great ethics, right? So he went out to interview at dental offices. And in his dental interview to be an associate dentist, the owner of the practice said, come, let's look at this case. It was a pediatric dentist. Let's look at this case. What do you think we should do in this case with this patient? So he took a look, and this, again, he's kind of being interviewed, and it's sort of practical. He looks, and he's, okay, it's simple restoration, no big deal. Takes him back to the office and says, let me tell you how it works here. In that case, in that patient's case, that would be a root canal. That would be an endodontic case. Are you comfortable with that? And my friend, who was just, again, a really good guy, I would trust him. I definitely would trust him as a person. He's just one of those people that everyone trusted and knew. He said, no, I wouldn't do that. I would not. Even if you told me that's what we do here and that's sort of what you're suggesting, I'm not comfortable with that. And he was very honest and very clear to that potential employer what he would and wouldn't do. Now, what was the consequence of that? He was never called back again, right? So he had this great opportunity. He had flown out for it, all the way out, kind of in a rural area. He was really wanted that job. It was going to be a great opportunity. There weren't many jobs at the time. But he decided to be honest. Like, he could have said, we're running out of money. I need this job. I just graduated. Yikes. And he could have said, sure, I'll do that. That would have been unethical to say, but it might have given him what he wanted. So there's usually either you're trying to avoid something bad when you make a bad ethical decision, or you're trying to get something that you want, right? So he could have done that and made the wrong choice, and then he's going to end up either doing what that owner wanted him to do, which is basically overtreating and harming patients, or he had to make a choice of saying no. And the consequence of saying no is that he might lose out on a good job, might lose out on some good salary. Of course, there are positives too. You probably avoided a bad working situation. But that's the idea there, is finding a real example from your experience where somebody, it's the easiest one to go with, somebody is trying to get you to do something you're not comfortable with. Colleague, usually someone with authority, possibly a patient, but remember, patients don't usually have as much power as doctors. Usually they're in the patient-doctor relationship. Who has the authority? It's the doctor. It's the dentist that has that authority. So it's rare for a patient to be manipulating and pushing around a dentist. It can happen, and maybe there's a situation where it's happened to you. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen or it's never going to work, but I'm saying in most cases, you want to think about the person with authority, the power, trying to influence someone underneath them. Again, it could also be a colleague in that case because they're at about the same level. So maybe a colleague, you see a colleague doing something they shouldn't be doing. What do? Do you mention something? Do you not mention something? So anyway, that's the idea. And I want to give you those guidelines about what kind of stories you should be thinking about in terms of coming up with your own. Now, I want to quickly go over interview mastery. This is something that we do every time, so excuse my little commercial here. But basically, we have something to help people prepare for their interviews, and it's interview mastery. We're going to get to some more ethical questions in a second, though. But I want to just quickly run through this. It's our course. It's our flagship course for interviewing, and we have helped people with this process since we started 7 or 8 years ago. We have fantastic people on our team, all with different experience interviewing, mostly in the educational side of things, medical side, so different stuff like that. And everybody's fantastic on our team, all of our coaches. Basically, you're going to learn the truth about how interviews really work. And what the course does, there's a sort of course component, and then there's a session component. The course stuff takes you through the fundamentals of interviewing to know what is going on, why are questions being asked, what are they really trying to get to in every particular question. Also, just the nuts and bolts, from what to wear, what kind of wardrobe subtleties should you be thinking about, what different colors could mean or suggest about your personality and what you're all about. Even things like protocols, shaking hands. Zoom, now I have a Zoom one, right? A Zoom protocol. There's different things. I was talking to a candidate the other day, and we were looking at her background behind her to see, let's talk about your background. And actually we even talked about her wardrobe because she was wearing all black shirt, black coat. It was a black formal coat, like a business jacket, and she had dark hair, and so on camera it was like a big blend of black, right, or darkness. And I said, because the lighting was not very good too, and I said, what you want to create is some contrast. And so we talked about what other options she might have to make sure that it didn't just look like she was wearing like a black cape or something. It was actually professional clothing. So stuff like that is what we talk about, and we get in there through the course, but also we have sessions. There's a one hour pre-mock session, which you just saw a second ago, and that's all about making sure that you have, we work with you one-on-one to make sure you have strategy for each of the most important questions on your upcoming interview. These are stuff like, tell me about yourself, why should we choose you, why do you want to come to Colorado, all that kind of stuff. We have a 2-hour mock interview session, and that is a feedback session following that. So it's a 1 hour, about 45 minutes to an hour of the interview, followed by the rest of that time with feedback. We also have another one coming out to there. Actually, this one says panel. That's sometimes we have a panel. It's not always. But basically, you're going to get 2 mock interviews if you sign up for the full package. And if you don't want the full package, we have something called the well-prepared package, which just comes with a pre-mock interview and a 2-hour mock. And so either option's really good. The full one's just going to be for people who really want that extra experience and training from us. And then there's also a post-mock, which is about an hour session with me where we talk about and go over some of the questions you had most problems with in your previous mock interviews. These are some of the modules that we have in the course: fundamentals, confidence. We have a whole thing on U.S. culture and academic culture specifically, a whole section on differentiating yourself, which is really important in this interview process. How do you make yourself stand out? Not just pass the interview, but actually stand out in a good way. And then we have a whole section called How Do I Respond, where we respond with specific kind of like personalized videos to questions you guys submit. So that's it in a nutshell. Oops, looks like I've got a few more of these coming through. Okay. And let's get back into the ethical scenarios. Now, the other ones were kind of questions. This one is more of a scenario. I thought this was an interesting one. What would you do if you suspected that a colleague of yours was abusing drugs? I guess it used to be colleagues were abusing drugs, but anyway. The first thing to think about with a situation like this is you have to demonstrate to the committees or to the people listening, interviewers, that you are somebody who doesn't rush in, doesn't take action impulsively, but you really assess the situation. You make sure, I think with ethical questions, especially when it's colleagues and they're doing something wrong, you always want to make sure that you're giving the benefit of the doubt to your colleagues, because there's nothing worse and nothing more scary, right, than the thought of one colleague making up stuff or calling someone out for something that they didn't do. It sounds like it could be unfair. Maybe they see something and they make an assumption, right? So this thought comes to mind, and maybe it's too much information, but I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I used to take shots, as part of my treatment, right? So I have a needle and stuff. And I used to have a roommate who he noticed, it was in college, he noticed some needles in my bathroom. These are legitimate prescription needles, syringe and needles. And he came to me and said, Kevin, I'm going to have to report you to the campus police. I just want to let you know I'm going to be reporting you because I don't want a roommate who's abusing drugs. And so, I was both upset and shocked by this, and I had to explain to him, and guess what? There's actually legitimate reasons that people have needles. It's not just for drugs. He was a little bit of a sheltered person, right? And so with a situation like that, you don't want to be rushing in and making an assumption based on, maybe you see someone really tired and maybe they're talking a little out of it than from they normally are. Do we really know that they're abusing drugs? Is that a fact yet? Are they possibly just exhausted? Maybe they have sleep deprived. We don't really know what it is. And so we want to show the committee that we are taking thoughtful actions to make sure that if we have a suspicion about someone, we're going to get to a point where we investigate beyond a reasonable doubt that, yes, that is probably what's happening. So we don't want to rush into conclusions. We want to seek facts first. So we're going to do some investigation first. We're going to let them know. I'm going to talk to other colleagues, not the colleague in question yet. I'm going to talk to maybe dental assistants in the office in a very confidential way and just say, hey, is there anything that you've noticed strange about Dr. So-and-so? Here's a couple things I've seen. Have you seen anything like this? And have those kind of conversations. And then if you have any other kind of other evidence, maybe you do see a particular drug that is either illegal or prescription, and you think that maybe there's some concerns about them taking it during work time. I don't know. You're going to do that kind of investigation, and you can build that kind of case. The other thing you have to think about, though, is there a risk to the patient? Is there a risk to the patient's safety? And so if there's not, and in this case it sounds like there would be, unless we're talking about caffeine or something. But if there was if you could see that by them taking this behavior, and if they are abusing drugs, there's a massive risk that the patients could be in danger. They could get treatment that doesn't work. They could also get there could be an accident surgically that causes a trauma or an infection or something. So there could be some real consequences to this. After you've done that, taken that initiative, so think about the first step is taking initiative, talking to people in question, and maybe eventually you're going to talk to that colleague in question and just say, these are a few things I've noticed. What's going on, right? After you've had that conversation and they deny or they acknowledge, you're going to escalate that to your seniors, to your authority, to the authority that you either, maybe it's an owner of the business, manager, maybe it's a professor if you're at school. You're going to escalate that to them and involve various colleagues that can help back up that story if necessary. And then the final aspect is support. You don't want to leave this question without showcasing that you do care. You're not just out to get this person. And so after you've escalated that to the authorities, whoever that, and I don't mean the police, I just mean, I would say in this case, it'd be better to escalate to an HR, better to escalate to a manager. Once you've done so, then you might say, and I would follow up with that colleague and just say, I'm sorry I had to, it was my duty to report you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, and if there's anything I can do to be of help, let me know. I do care about your safety. I do care about your health, and I just want to make sure that you're in the best position you can for both yourself and our patients. So that'd be the way that I would approach that. Again, think of the pillars again that I mentioned, the big ones. Taking initiative. You don't want to just sit back and do nothing. That's one thing that they want you to make sure of. That you're escalating that to the proper seniority staff, so to the proper channels. Usually not the police. I would not say that I'd rush out and call the police on this. That's a little overboard. And if it needs to happen, that would be a decision HR could make or something like that, or your owners of the company. And then support, making sure that there's an empathetic side to it, showcasing that I do care. I'm here for you, and whatever you need me to do, and hopefully there's a sincerity in that relationship where they actually believe you too. So that's that one. Not an easy one to answer, but those are some fundamentals to think about in terms of how to answer that. The next one: would you override a treatment plan proposed by your senior attending if you knew that your treatment plan was more correct? Now, this is actually similar to another Colorado question. The other one involves a professor. This one is also one that we've heard from Colorado, and this is specifically a senior that is helping you and guiding you through the treatment plan. Most likely, and this also could. I mean, the other thing I'm thinking as I look at it, it could also be a residency situation. If any of you have a residency interview, it could be either where you are a junior resident and you have someone who's kind of overseeing you. It could also be someone where you have a resident, and if you're a dental student, you might have a resident who is maybe a TA or some sort of a teaching position, and they're not necessarily a professor, but they are effectively that, and they're giving you the treatment plan. So, but the main crux of this question is, would you override a treatment plan by someone who has authority over you? Well, of course, this is a tough one for many international dentists, especially because you already know, many of you have already practiced, right, in your home countries for an extensive amount of time. You're already professionals. You already know what you're doing. And so the question for them is, will you, if you see something wrong with this treatment plan that was given you and you just know it's not right, you know it's not what the right thing to do is, should you override it and just do what's best for the patient? Not an easy question. Because if you think about it, if you see a treatment plan that's actually maybe harmful, possibly more harmful to the patient, is it better to just do what's best for the patient? Isn't that what we're all about, is doing what's best for the patient, right? So on the surface, it looks very confusing, right? Well, I don't know. Maybe I should do what's right for the patient, or should I just listen to the authority, which may be wrong? The reality is, why you have to understand why they're asking the question to get to what to say. The reason that they're asking the question is they really want to evaluate and test whether they can trust you to follow directions. It's that simple. The notion that there's a scenario where you've been given a treatment plan that's just going to hurt a patient, it's possible, right? Probably happens more often than we'd like. But the reality is, you're not able to practice legally by yourself until you've finished the dental program in the U.S. and been licensed by a state, right? So until you have that legal authority to practice, technically you don't have the authority to override a treatment plan, because the treatment plan was given to you by someone who has the authority to practice one-on-one with a patient in that state. and under the authority of the school who has the right to do so. So they are the ones with the dental license, and they're the ones with the power to be able to treat, and they're kind of lending that to you. They're lending that to you. Similar to like you see like a student driver is a kind of interesting example, but you'll see some cars that say student driver. The students in that car don't have a license. They could not drive by themselves on the road, but they're allowed to by law because the teacher who's registered with the state has the authority to teach students without a license in real traffic, right? So same idea here. You are only allowed to treat patients in that setting, in that clinical setting at a school, because of the authority vested in you by the school, and that gives you permission to do so. So it's really not about whether it's right or wrong. It's about basically they have the last word. Now, that said, you can always say something like, no, I would not override the treatment, but I would discuss with my senior or with my professor the treatment plan to figure out like why they're choosing that treatment plan, why they think that's the best way. I would bring up my concerns and see what they say. And if they let me know either one, very likely they would convince me that I was wrong and that they were right. That's great. I want to hear that. But also, either way, it's really not. And this is me talking as a candidate. Either way, it's really not for me to override that. It's for me to understand why they're doing what they're doing. I will, of course, always want to know why, because that's the kind of person I am. I'm curious. I'd like to know why, not just what, and that's just my nature. But I also have a deep respect for my professors, and I'm coming to a dental program because I trust their expertise and their experience. So you want to kind of end on that note of just, hey, don't worry. I am somebody that can take directions, and I'm not going to be a big rebel, basically. So think about that. That's an important one. It's an important question for Colorado, and actually many schools. All right. My numbers are all over the place, so I apologize that 2 is not changing here. Classmate asks you to complete a lab requirement on type it on to get a pass. What would you do in this situation? Again, this is a much more simple one. This is probably earlier and may or may not be. It probably actually would be at a lot of advanced studying programs. But basically, you have a Tapidont project. Somebody knows that you're really good at it. You have great hand skills. You have great understanding of the techniques. And a friend who's not very good asks you to do it. Well, of course, the answer is no, I wouldn't. But you have to show why. Because it's not just, again, they need it. It's sort of, in math, they always have this kind of saying here, at least in the U.S. math classes, they always say, show your work. So it's not just to say, okay, well, here's this complicated equation. Here's my, the answer is 8. Teachers like to know, how did you get to that? Show us your work. Show us the equation. Show us you writing that, working through that, so that they know you're not cheating. So in the sense here, yes, maybe the answer is no, I wouldn't, but why wouldn't you do it? And really we're going to want to talk about the ramifications. Like it's not hurting anybody, right? Like, it's just a patient. There's no patient here. Just a Typodont, it's just some plastic. What's the big problem? I'm only helping him or her with something that he's not very good at. We're all good at different things. Well, the ramifications, of course, that you need to describe to them in that interview are big. That if they can't pass this project and do acceptable work for a simple Typodont project, how will they be able to do that in the real world? How will they be able to actually succeed in treatments with real patients? And if they don't start now, when are they going to get good at it? When are they going to start? And there's always, of course, these kind of scenarios where you hear about dentists who kind of passed through dental school and they were really bad, right? They're not very good dentists and they're out practicing and they have great personalities, maybe they have great charisma. They succeed in the sense that they're really personable, but everyone who knows them, who is also a dentist, says, I would never go to them for my actual work. So we want to make sure that we're not kind of promoting that kind of behavior, and we're showcasing the interview committee. That's not acceptable to me. Even if they asked me and pleaded with me and they were my best friend, I would never do that just because it's not right for them. It's going to affect their patients one day, and it's going to affect the field and prestige of dentistry in the long run. So, all right. Almost done with these. I think we have a few more. Scenario 3, probably 4 actually. Over lunch, a fellow colleague tells you that she sometimes withholds facts, the fact that she could do a bridge instead, and instead, only informs patients about implants. So she wants to bill more. Now, this would obviously be somebody who has a lot of experience with implants, and they're good at it. And I wouldn't be surprised if this happens sometimes. But it's that situation of kind of similar to you see your colleague taking drugs or abusing drugs. You are not on the hook here. You're not even you're only put in a difficult position because she told you. Otherwise, you would be innocent. But now that she's told you, the clock kind of has started, right? That's the problem. You've now been put in a position where there's a responsibility here, and you have the choice to either ignore it and just say, oh, I didn't hear that. Let me walk away. I don't want to hurt. This is probably a friend. Usually, if you're going to have a lunch with her, she's probably a friend. And it's really unfun and unpleasant to actually confront somebody and just say, hey, that's not cool. Or even more so, to report her to an authority. So again, this is all about what's the right answer. The right answer, unfortunately, or fortunately for you, whatever you kind of feel. I know a lot of people would be uncomfortable reporting a friend about this and just be like, ooh, I wish she wouldn't do that. That's not good. Well, the truth is, in reality, whatever your ethics are, schools don't want to hear that you would just let them pass or even. Now, another one that kind of most people do is this. Most people will say, you know what, I would tell her to stop. I would tell her that's not appropriate. You need to stop that. And I would be really upset with her and scold her. But that's all they'll do, right? And so maybe if they get a follow-up question, would you take this to the owner of the practice, or would you take this to your manager? Maybe, but probably not. I just want to try to check with them first, see if things change first, see if she stops doing that. Well, how will you know if she stops doing that? You're not going to know. She just told you that. You didn't even know beforehand. So it's not likely that she's ever going to tell you again if you tell her to stop. She's probably just going to keep doing it. So this is really about you stepping up, doing the hard thing. You might lose her friendship. Those are some consequences. You might lose her respect. She might make fun of you. She might tell everybody else in the office that you're, a dentist that shouldn't be trusted, that you'll tell on them, or you'll try to get them in trouble. She might make lies out of it. So there's a lot of consequences you face by doing this, but the consequence of not doing that is the other thing that you have to explain, which is this could hurt people. And this is, it's just unethical. If I was a patient, I wouldn't want to have no options except for an implant, or just not be told about it conveniently, right? So you have to make the case that this is not appropriate. It's not what we do, and to provide the right way is to provide all the different options to our patients. Let them have that autonomy. Again, that's where the autonomy comes into play. Give them the autonomy to make a decision for themselves. Now, you're always welcome to give them the pros and cons of each choice, but they at least need to have more than one choice if there is such an option. So that's what you want to do, is describe why this is important, why it's going to lead to problems down the road. And if there's nothing else, you can always just say, these are not my values. I don't think that that's right. I wouldn't want to be that patient, and I believe in doing treating your patient the way you would like to be treated. And I think you're good with that one. All right, so now the final one. I believe this is the final one. You're working in a branch of a large corporate office. The office manager informs you that the way things are done around here is to always let the patients know they need a bone graft even after a simple extraction in order to fill in the socket. What do you do? So bone grafts obviously make a lot of money, and often they're needed. They're absolutely vital, but there are times where they may not be. And so if this is the case that someone is doing that same kind of activity, but in this case it's not the dentist, it's an office manager, and they're not actually treating the patient, but they're trying to let you know how things are done around here. Again, they're not the expert, right? But they're trying to subtly tell you got to follow, and if you don't, you could be out of here. So this is a situation where it's not as easy as just, oh, well, it was my colleague, they're doing something wrong, I'll just forget about it. This is a situation where your job could be on the line, and very quickly, if they start to catch that you are not following the protocol, the unwritten protocol, which of course they're never going to have written anywhere, that you got to do these bone grafts all the time. Of course, it's going to be better for the practice financially and all that stuff. So you want to admit that. Say, I understand that sometimes, especially in large corporate practices, there is a tendency to find ways to, there's a lot of overhead and there's a need to maximize revenue, to make sure that everyone's paid. I get that. But the truth is that just like a patient has autonomy to choose what's best for them, a dentist should also have the autonomy to make a decision and have a close connection and make that decision, or maybe just have a discussion with the patient about what's best for the patient and make that authoritative decision on their own about what's best for the patient and present it to them. It shouldn't be from a third party or especially from a non-medical or non-dental person who's not an expert in this to tell a doctor how to treat. It should be left to the dentist. And so I would push back if I heard that from the office manager, because I don't want to set a precedent that that's okay and I'm just willing to do whatever they want. I would say, you know what, I appreciate that, and I absolutely believe that when we do bone grafts, that they can be extremely useful and important procedures in certain circumstances, and I will absolutely give you my word that I will always do those when I see that there's a need for it. But I would say that to do it on every occasion when there's even a simple extraction, that's beyond what I'm comfortable with. I'm simply not comfortable with that, and that's just not going to work for me. So I'm sorry, I can't promise to abide by that. And if they do say, well, if you want to stay here, you're going to do it, what I would respond with is, I understand, and I hope that that's for the sake of the reputation of this company. I hope that that's not really something that you would actually hold to me and try to take away my authority to make decisions as an expert. But I'm not willing to compromise. Those are my values. So whatever the consequences is just not what I'm doing. Now, this is, again, what I'm saying to the dental school, just to show them, these are my values. I'm standing by them. I'm not going to back down. Don't push me around. And I'm very authoritative. I'm very strong in this because I want to show that to the interview committee, this is the kind of person I am. And of course, that's what I would hope all of you would do anyway. Who wants to be bossed around by some office manager and told what kind of treatments they should do? This is actually, and this one I've heard of even happening in the real practice, unfortunately, because of course there's people who, you just want you want a good income, you want to make sure you have a good job, all this. I get it, but it's stuff that happens and stuff that people ask. There's questions about this in a lot of interviews. So those are some of the big ones. I've heard of almost all of these throughout the years at Colorado. Not everyone, and certainly not all at once in interviews. You maybe get one of them at most. And this one actually is not one of the most common ones. I've heard this maybe once or twice in the many years I've done this, or a similar thing to this. But that said, it's just good to think about it. And I also like to walk you through the different scenarios, because each one you kind of learn the process and the approach to responding. And once you kind of understand what they're looking for with each one, it's going to give you a better idea to be able to handle ones that I didn't bring up. Maybe there's one there are likely many that I have not even thought about or seen. And you might get one that's brand new. One thing about Colorado, they love to spring brand new questions that they've thought about and really hard ones on interview candidates every year. So they always come up with brand new creative ones that is like, wow, that was so cool. It's so hard. But if you've already gone through and understand the process for each one of these, then I think you're going to do it better on the fly with one that we've never talked about or you've never heard. So think about that. Let's get into some questions. We don't have too much time. I think we're over now. We're over about 10 minutes, and so we're going to wrap up quickly. But let's see. Jisha asks, can we reply saying that maybe not override? I guess this is the one about the your senior dental plan, dental treatment. Maybe not override, but I would like to discuss with the senior attending about my treatment plan and if there were any risk associated with it or not ideal in this case. Right. So I think it's a fair thing to say in your reply. The one thing I will counsel you to be careful of is you want to find that balance between you want to find the balance of like, hey, I'm going to bring up this concern on one side, and I'm going to, or you don't want to make it look like you're going to argue and get into some kind of like confrontation with them about this, and you're going to stand up for what I believe. You don't want to showcase yourself as somebody who's just ready for a fight, ready for a confrontation. And why is that? Because they have already dealt with candidates that have done this. They get into dental school, and there's a particular dental student that just knows it all, and they're out there and they're arguing about this and that with their professors, and they're questioning everything. That's not fun for them. That's not what they're looking for. They want people that respect their experience and all that stuff. So I'm not saying don't do that. In fact, I encourage you to actually say something like, I might not, of course I would never override it, but what I would say is I would talk with them like you did and ask them about the various risks, just so that I know. I would like to know and learn as much as I can from them. And I might present some other possibilities and see what their thoughts are, and see if there's any option, would they be open to considering a different way? And if so, why or why not? But I certainly, at the end of the day, and you want to, again, bring home that point again, at the end of the day, I want to respect and understand that they are the experts, not me in this case. And they're the ones that have the authority to make that decision and not me. So I want to give that credence. All right, so the last one, Viral asks, what would you do if a friend drops a mouth mirror on the floor, picks it up, and uses it without sanitation? Right. And so the two questions. The other one is, if a patient comes in inebriated to your office, how would you handle it? So if you had a friend who drops a mouth mirror on the floor, this could possibly be, I guess, most likely a dentist, but I guess it could also be a hygienist. It could be maybe even a dental assistant. But if you see that happening, and if I'm answering that question, I would probably, I'm trying to think of on the spot. What are some different ways you could do this? Probably the best thing to do would be to, if there's possibility, ask to talk with that dentist one-on-one real quick. So I might interrupt them in the treatment and just say, Dr. So-and-so, I have an important question. When you get a chance, could we talk for a second? And hopefully interrupt that process. When they get a chance, they could stand up, come and talk to me. And I would just say, I noticed what you did. I noticed that you happened to drop that mouth mirror on the floor. And when you picked it up, you didn't go through the sanitation process. I'm assuming that it was a mistake. We all make mistakes. I get that. But I just want to let you know that, just make you aware of it, because, of course, we wouldn't want to put the patient in danger in any way or cause any problems that way. So just saw that. Of course, I would never want to do that in front of the patient and embarrass that doctor. I would always make sure to do that in confidence. The other option, of course, is to say that you would do that after. You could always say, if I saw that, I would probably talk to them afterwards and say, doctor, I saw that you picked it up on the floor. That really concerns me, and it's really, my hope is that it's just an accident, but just be careful, please. That way, either way, you're showing that you're addressing the issue, you're confronting them. If this were a pattern, that would be something I would bring it to a supervisor with. I wouldn't necessarily bring a one-time incident to my supervisor or the owner or something like that. I would always wait until this became a pattern. And then the argument for doing it during the treatment is that maybe you can still mitigate the situation a little bit. It might, and it's kind of rude and disruptive to go into someone and pull them out of their treatment, right? But on the other hand, if they keep just using that thing, I don't know, maybe it's too late by that time, but in a way there's an argument to say, well, maybe they haven't used it yet. Maybe they just stuck it in there. Maybe it hasn't touched any surfaces. So if you can catch them before they do accidentally touch a surface of the patient's mouth, maybe you'll actually help the patient, save the patient. So there's an argument to interrupt them. So something to think about. If a patient came in inebriated in your office, how would you handle that situation? How would you handle her? This is not necessarily an ethical question. This would just be sort of like a difficult scenario, because there's not really, would it be unethical to treat them? I guess you could actually make a case that it would be unethical to treat them in terms of like what the effect on their blood could be. You know, it could have thinned their blood a little bit, or it could have an effect on their blood viscosity. I don't know, but you know, it's possible that would just be from a surgical standpoint very bad, but just in terms of them being obnoxious or them being difficult to deal with, that could also present problems, right? And if they are unruly or out of you know, they're not in their right state of mind, they could make sudden jerks or movements and cause their own trauma to what could have been a good surgery. So, you know, I think in that case, you just have to have that you know, that difficult conversation with them and just say, you know, I have to say, Mr. So-and-so, I see patients every day. I smell a lot of breath, and I just, because I do that, I know the difference between a breath that smells like alcohol and one that doesn't. And I have to say, no judgment here, but I detect alcohol in your breath. Have you had a drink or two before that you came here? And if they admit it, I just say, listen, again, no judgment. We all, you know, we all have our areas, but I can't treat you, and here's the reasons why. It's just not safe, and here's some, you know, I just don't want to put you in danger. So let's do this. Let's reschedule. You promise me we'll find a time that maybe works better for you, so that, you know, it's a time where you're not going to expect him to have a drink or anything like that, and we'll do this again, and we'll look forward to seeing you. So that would be a good way of handling it. If they were kind of obnoxious and they were refused and they were kind of getting in your face about it and said, no, I didn't drink, and you can tell that they did, you still have the ultimate call to say, you know what, I want to believe you, but that's not what I'm experiencing right now. And so just to be on the safe side, I'm going to say, let's reschedule this. All right, great. Let's do one more, since we're over time, and I know people have things they need to work on and get going with. 9-year-old patient is crying. So pediatric patient crying, anxious. He's at the dental office for a tooth extraction. You say you are just looking into his mouth, and then you pull out his tooth. Is this ethics? Is this against the ethics? Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I don't even think that, I mean, I've not studied anything about pediatric dentistry, so I would encourage you to look and see what the best practice is if you either remember it, or if you want to kind of talk to a pediatric dentist or look stuff up, just some modern best practices. I'm guessing this is sort of an old school trick from the old, you know, family doctor, to be able to just say, hey, let's just tell him everything's good, and they'll yank it while he's not looking. And as long as the parents sort of like are okay with that, and maybe they encourage it, there may be a case. But what I would say is, and if I were to get this question, I would just say, you know what, I don't feel that's the most ethical approach. And it would be nice if I actually had some data, by the way. It'd be nice if I read up on this and said, you know, I know that the ADA recommends for pediatric patients that, you know, transparency and just to discuss what's going to happen to them before they go in is the best approach. It'd be nice to have that as kind of like my ammunition, right? But if I haven't, I'm just going to have to guess and just say, you know, my sense of this is that if I were that patient, it could probably cause more trauma psychologically down the road if I had a dentist that kind of broke my trust. You could, even if you weren't sure, but you wanted to kind of throw an argument there that provide some backing to that, you could even use a personal example if you have one. I had a bunch of dentistry as a child, so I could easily see that if a dentist pulled that one on me, I could be really scared of dentists the rest of my life because they weren't honest and forthright with me. So even from a best practices point of view, it doesn't sound wise to me. Even if the parents had said, yeah, go ahead and do it, because again, they think they're saving you from this bad experience, but it's going to be bad either way. And it's just, sometimes I think it's worse to be lied to even at a young age, right? So I would just say, for me, it's not what I would do. I think it would be rather unethical to pull that one just because the patient doesn't know what's coming. And even if the parents wanted me to do this, I probably would advise against it just because I think being transparent and supportive and letting them know exactly what to expect is going to build more trust for that patient. They're going to really trust me and feel less resistance to coming back to me and for further treatment. So I think it is unethical. But that's just my approach to it, and those are my values. And so that's, again, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head with that one. I'd be surprised if that were necessarily a best practice that's recommended, But I'm not sure that that's necessarily unethical in all cases. I guess there could be an argument for it being one. I think it's a really interesting question. I'll be looking it up into seeing like what's kind of the modern approach to that, because I can again imagine that being somewhat okay a few generations ago. All right, great. Thank you guys. Really interesting questions. Thank you for throwing those into the mix, and I hope that you guys found this useful, valuable, informative. That's our goal here, is to try to present some different ideas of thinking about how you respond to these kind of questions. Now, this particular workshop, as most of ours do, they go into our interview mastery course, and those who are in there, most of those who are in there have full access to this. I think we're going to be making this Colorado series available for everyone who's an interview mastery member, at least for this year, and we might change that in the future. But if you're a fully prepared member of the Interview Master, you're definitely going to have access to this video because it's part of the interview workshop series. So we take these videos, we throw them in there, and that's why we don't like to scamp. We like to make sure that we're giving you the full experience. So for those of you who came out to the live workshop, that's sort of like our gratitude for you, is like we want to give you the best quality kind of information that we can and not hold anything back. And those of you who came out for this, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And also, it's a hats off to you guys for investing that kind of time into yourself, especially those of you who don't have an actual interview date yet. And for those of you who are here and you don't have one, what that tells me is that you're somebody who's pretty determined, and I would not be surprised if all of you end up with that interview date sooner than later. So I'll be wishing for that. All right, that's all I got, you guys. Thank you so much for coming out. And if you have any questions, always let us know at mail@internationaldentistcentral.com. Have a great night, and please stay safe, stay healthy, take care of yourselves and your family.